Error handling in Next.js. This video is going to cover how it works, and I'm also going to show you a demonstration in a Next.js app, just a demo app, showing you error handling and why it might be a good idea to have error handling in specific segments and different things like that. So without further ado, error handling in Next.js. So if you've seen some of my other videos regarding creating pages in Next.js, creating different routes, creating different layouts, different things like that, you'll know at this point that Next.js uses typical file conventions to handle certain UX and UI. And they do the same thing here with their error handling. So they use an error.js file, and that is going to effectively be an error boundary for whatever page or whatever route segment that is. So the error.js file convention allows you to gracefully handle runtime errors in nested routes, automatically wrap a route segment and its nested children in a React error boundary, create error UI tailored to specific segments using the file system hierarchy to adjust granularity, isolate errors to affected segments while keeping the rest of the app functional, and add functionality to attempt to recover from an error without a full page reload. So this error handling, definitely important, definitely part of a production application. So the way that you can handle your error UI and add error boundaries within your application are by adding error.js files. So here within this kind of demonstration application that Next.js has here, they have an overall app folder, then they have a dashboard route segment, and within this, they have an error.js page. And just by creating this error.js page, Next.js is going to wrap your dashboard page with an error boundary. So if there's an error that occurs in your dashboard page or any nested routes within your dashboard page, so if you had /dashboard/settings and you didn't have an error.js file in your settings route and an error occurred there, that error would bubble up to the next closest error boundary within that kind of branch of your component tree. So it would hit this error boundary within your dashboard route here. And then as an example, what this looks like. So first off, they use the use client statement or string up at the top of their file, as when using error boundaries here and creating your error.js files, these need to be client components. Okay. And then effectively what they do here is automatically with your error component here within error.js, Next.js is going to pass you an object that contains an error property and a reset property. And the reset property, this is going to be a function that is effectively just going to re-render the component without triggering a full page reload, which can sometimes allow you to resolve the error without fully reloading the page. And then also within this, it gives you access to the error itself, the error that kind of propagated to this component, which you can do whatever you want to do at that point with that error. Now, to get in a little bit more on how error.js works here. So right here, they show kind of what I mentioned. Your error.js that effectively gets translated to an error boundary that wraps the page within your component hierarchy. Okay, so as they say here, error.js automatically creates an error boundary that wraps a nested child segment or page.js component. The React component exported from error.js file is used as the fallback component. So for this error boundary, you set a fallback. So if there's an error, you show the fallback to the user. And in this instance, they're automatically making the error.js the fallback for this error boundary that it wraps around this page component here. And if an error is thrown within the error boundary, the error is contained and the fallback component is rendered. When the fallback error component is active, layouts above the error boundary maintain their state and remain interactive. And the error component can display functionality to recover from the error. So if the error occurs in just this dashboard page right here, then this is going to be the only non-interactive page. You could still use the sidebar and like this header here. And I'll show you an example of this here in just a second. And then more on recovering from errors. The cause from an error can sometimes be temporary. So they automatically pass you a reset function that will basically allow you to re-render the page. And that's what it's doing here. So instead of doing a full page reload, it passes you a reset function here in which you can basically just re-render the page and see if it fixes your error. And then now on nested routes. So if you have like a root error boundary, so within your overall app component, but then within your dashboard route segment, you also have an error.js file. Well, the kind of simplified layout of this is going to look like this following image here. So you're going to have your root error boundary, and that is within your root layout, which we'll get to the implications of this in just a second. But you have your root error boundary, and then you have your dashboard page right here. You have the dashboard page layout, and then you have the dashboard error boundary, and then you render out your page. So if an error occurs in this dashboard page, your dashboard error boundary is going to show. But if an error occurred in your dashboard layout, then you would actually show the error boundary for your root error.js page. And we'll cover that in just a second here as well. Okay, so that is the overall structure of how Next.js does that. And then as they kind of mention in here, the nested component hierarchy has implications for the behavior of error.js files across the nested route. Errors bubble up to the nearest parent in the error boundary, like what I mentioned earlier. This means an error.js file will handle errors for all its nested child segments. And then you can be more or less granular in your error handling by adding your nested error.js files if needed. So say you have dashboard /settings /account, and you only have an error boundary in your dashboard folder, and error occurs in your account route or your account page, that's going to bubble up all the way to your dashboard. But if you add an error boundary or an error.js file within your account folder, and an error occurs in that account, well, then the error is just going to be handled by that error.js file there, and it's not going to bubble up all the way, which also means your settings and dashboard page will remain interactive, which is probably what you want. And to my point on layouts earlier, an error.js boundary will not handle errors thrown in a layout.js component in the same segment because the error boundary is nested within the layout. So here in this example, for this dashboard error boundary, you see it's nested within the dashboard layout here, which means that if an error occurs in the dashboard layout, then that's going to bubble up to your next highest error boundary, not your dashboard error boundary, which that could potentially be a bit of a gotcha if you don't know it's kind of nested like this. And then talk about handling errors in layout. So it goes over exactly what I just said here, but it adds to handle errors within the root layout or template. So if it's an error in the root layout, then that means your root error.js file is not going to catch that error. However, you can use a variation of error.js called global-error.js, and this would handle errors in your root layout. I think generally, as long as you're not doing like a bunch of API requests and stuff like that within your root layout or your root template, then you probably don't need to worry about this too much. But in case you have that use case, that is how you would handle errors within that root layout. Okay, and that's just the root layout, not the root page, because the root page is nested within your root error boundary. So that would be enough to catch the root page errors. Okay, it can be a little tricky, so I recommend definitely playing around with this, especially once we build this demo app here in a second, and they go over what I just added here. But it's also important to note that the global error.js must define its own HTML and body tags, because the fallback will replace the root layout when the fallback is active. So if you replace your root layout and your root layout no longer renders your HTML and body tags, you need to make sure that you are doing this within your global-error.js file. Okay, so if you do feel like you need to use this and handle errors in your root layout, then make sure your global-error.js has a HTML as well as body tags. And they say it's kind of the least granular way to handle errors because it's at the very base of your application. And it's basically like a catch-all error handling for the whole web application. And they say, even if you do use global-error.js, it's still recommended to use the error.js file, which includes globally shared UI and branding. And then finally, for handling server errors, this is effectively saying that if an error occurs in the server component, it's still going to propagate that error up into the nearest air.js file. All right. So let's actually dive into VS Code here and start with an application just to show you kind of how this works. So what we're going to do is run npx create next latest, and I'm going to do air handling is going to be my project name. No TypeScript, ESLint, Tailwind, SRC. I am going to use the app router and not going to mess with the import aliases. So we're going to go ahead and spin up this app here. And then I'm going to go file and open this app within my kind of directory here. And what we're going to do to start here is we're going to create a couple different pages. So let's go ahead and create a dashboard route segment here. So new folder within my app folder. I'm going to do dashboard. And then we're just going to add a page.jsx file, export default function, dashboard page, and we're just going to return an H1 that says dashboard page. And then within my dashboard, I'm actually going to do a nested route here, in which I'm going to do another route segment within my dashboard, and I'm going to go with settings, and then we're going to add a page.jsx file here. So new file, page.jsx, and then I copied my export default function dashboard page, but I'm just going to redo this to settings page here. And it's going to be my settings page. So we should have our home route and render out this generic page.js that Next.js creates. And then we should have a dashboard page as well as a nested settings page. So dashboard/settings here. So let's go ahead and run npm run dev and get the server running here. And it started on localhost 3000. So let's go to localhost 3000. Let's reload this and get this spinning up here. And I do have my home page here. And I do have my dashboard page. And I do have my settings page here as well. So now what I'm going to do is let's just throw an error. Let's throw an error within the settings page and just see how that looks when we have no error boundaries whatsoever. So I'm going to go ahead and ask ChatGPT, could you write a JavaScript function simulating a network error? And then let's see what it comes up with. So function simulate network error. And then it's basically setting a timeout and then rejecting a promise. So I think that this will work just fine. So let's go back to VS Code. And within my settings page here, I'm going to paste this error. And then I'm within my settings page, I'm going to say const error is equal to simulate network error. So this is basically just going to throw an error within my application and it's going to do it after 2 seconds. I think I'm okay with 2 seconds actually. And then to make sure that this breaks my app, I'm going to render out the error here and do it like that. So let's now go back to my settings page. And as we can see, I get an unhandled runtime error. So when I don't use an error boundary here, this is what occurs. I do not have any air.js file within my application. So I just get this runtime error here because I'm not really handling anything. It's an unhandled error, which generally you don't want to happen. So let's go back and let's go ahead here and let's just add an air.js page within my overall app folder here. So I'm gonna add new file, air.js, and then let's go back to the docs here. So I'm going to just copy this here, nice, simple air component, and then we're going to paste it in here. So now I have an air.js within my app directory. So if an error occurs within my settings page here, it should propagate up to my root app here, and I should be handling this error now. So if we come back and we go to localhost 3000, you see that I now get my UI here of something went wrong, try again. And the page is cutting it off a little bit, but also has this little box at the bottom that Next.js gives you of one error. Okay. So now I'm handling this error. This is no longer unhandled because I added this root air.js page and it kind of propagated it up. And you might be thinking, great, this is all you have to do to handle errors and this should be good. Well, let's go ahead and create a navigation bar and I'll show you why we might want to handle errors in nested routes here. So coming back here, let's go ahead and just create a basic like header here. And within my app, I'm going to write a new folder called components and a new file called header.jsx. I'm going to export default function header. And then we're just going to hard code like a header here. So let's go ahead here and just add a nav with a UL. And then we're going to have a couple LIs here. And I'm going to just say home. And then we're going to copy this down. And then this is going to be dashboard. And this is going to be settings. And we want to add some sort of navigation here. So I'm going to import use router. And it's not from Next router. This is a mistake. I've made this mistake at other tutorials. It's from Next navigation. I'm going to say const router is equal to calling use router. And then I'm going to say for all of these, I'm going to add an on click. And we're going to use the router to programmatically navigate to those different routes. So I'm going to do router.push and just our home page here. And then this one's going to be for our dashboard page. And then this one here is going to be for our dashboard settings page. And I have something wrong here in which I need to close this curly brace here as well as right here. Now this is going to look ugly. So let's do const nav styles is equal to display flex. And then we'll just space them evenly. So justify content and I'll do space evenly. And then we'll give it some padding here of 20 pixels. And we'll also make a list style type here is none. And I need to add this to this UL here. So style equals my nav styles. And I don't generally recommend hard coding styles like this, but for the sake of this demo, we're going to. So let's go ahead here and render this header out within my root layout here. And actually, I don't want to render it out within my root layout because my root layout wraps this error boundary here. So even if an error occurred in my settings page, my navigation bar would still work because my root layout is higher up in the hierarchy than my error page here. So this would still catch the error and allow me to use this navigation. And I want to show you what it looks like when you don't catch the error high enough and you can't use your navigation. So actually within my dashboard page, I'm going to add a layout.js file. And let's go ahead and do JSX. And what I need to do is export default function dashboard layout. And it's going to be past a children prop here. And I'm just going to return a React fragment in which I return my header. And let's see if I can get some autocomplete up in here. And I do. And I'm going to also render out my children. So I rendered out my header within my dashboard page. And I still have my error going on here in my settings page. Let's actually remove this for now. And did I mess anything else up? I don't think so. So let's go ahead here and refresh. And I also need to remove this real quick. One thing I forgot to do in my header is, since I'm doing client-side navigation here, I need to also make this use client. I forget this all the time. So I think that this should start working now. So, okay, I have my settings page. I can go to my home page. And then since I render my header within my dashboard, I need to go back to my dashboard to see my header here. And I go to my dashboard, go to my settings. So yeah, it's working. So let's go ahead here and let's throw an error within the settings page and see what happens. So let's go back to settings. I have my error back, and then we're going to go error. And here we're going to come back. Let's go to settings. And what you're going to see, if I refresh my page here, is we now get an error. But notice something here. We lose our header. And that is because this error is, we're handling it within my dashboard folder, within my dashboard error.js file. So since that's the case, the error is occurring and then I'm not able to see my header here. So since I'm handling my error higher up in my component hierarchy, I'm not able to still interact with my header, which is something we probably don't want. And this isn't just for the sake of headers. Like, you're probably going to render your header maybe in your root of your application here, and you wouldn't run into this, but this could also be a dashboard sidebar that you want to use. And when an error occurs in a nested route like this, you probably wouldn't want the sidebar to be completely non-interactive. So the way that we can kind of fix this is, all we need to do is add an error.js file within our settings folder, so we can handle this error a little bit earlier on, so we can still use our dashboard layout and interact with it. So I'm going to go to my error page here, and I misspoke earlier. We're handling the error within our root of our application, not our dashboard page. But now we're going to handle it within our settings page here, our most kind of leafmost component here. So let's go here. Let's just copy this. Let's go to settings, error.js, and I'm going to say something went wrong in the settings page. And if we come back here, what you're going to see is, if I refresh this now, I get something went wrong in the settings page, but I can still use my navigation up here because I moved the error handling further down in my component hierarchy. So now when the error occurs in the settings page, I'm not completely losing my like dashboard UI and my dashboard components, and I can still interact with all that stuff. So I can still go here and I'm just fine right now. Okay. So hopefully this example shows you how you can handle errors in your Next applications, and the importance of where you're putting that error.js file and how it can affect the interaction of your application when an error occurs. Now, this doesn't mean that you need to handle or have an error.js file in every single root segment, but if you have a more leaf segment that is doing network requests or something like that, then you probably should have an error boundary there so you don't lose the functionality of your application up until like a error boundary way up in your kind of component hierarchy here. Okay. So that is handling errors in Next.js. Next up, we're going to cover parallel routes, intercepting routes, route handling, and much more. So thanks for tuning into this, and I'll see you in that next one.